Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I'd like to acknowledge in the audience with us this afternoon, Dr. Peter Smith, Chief Education Officer, Ministry of Education, Trinidad and Tobago, Professor Indar Ramnarayan, Acting Campus Principal, and other members of the Campus Executive Management Team, the UE St. Augustine, Dr. Len Archer, Provost, University of the Southern Caribbean, Professor Prakash Prasad, President, University of Trinidad and Tobago, distinguished professor and special guest, Professor Rory McGreal of Athabasca University, Canada, deans, heads, faculty, staff, and students of the UE St. Augustine campus, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am Professor Sharon Hack, Chair of the Open Lectures Committee here at the UE St. Augustine campus, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the distinguished open lecture featuring Professor Rory McGreal from Athabasca University from Canada this afternoon. We are extremely pleased and excited to host you this evening. In the words of the philosopher and educational reformer John Dewey, if we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. It feels as if the landscape of education is changing faster than we can keep up sometime, and we hope this evening's lecture on the transformative impact of open educational resources will open your minds to amazing possibilities. The role of the Open Lecture Committee is to advance the university's knowledge transfer agenda via high-quality lectures by exceptional local, regional, and international speakers. These lectures are just one of the platforms that our campus uses to engage the wider national community on issues relevant to local and regional development, impact regional policy making, analysis and evaluation, and stimulate and encourage the pursuit of excellence and scholarship. The committee also hosts professorial inaugural lectures to showcase the research of the campus' recently appointed or promoted professors. Be sure to follow us on Facebook at this UE St. Augustine, where you will see information on upcoming events, of which there are several this semester. At this point, I would like to invite Professor Indar Ramnarayan, Acting Campus Principal, St. Augustine Campus, to deliver the opening remarks. Let us welcome him to the stage.
Thank you very much, Chair. Dr. Peter Smith, Chief Education Officer, Ministry of Education. Dr. Len Archer, Provost, University of the Southern Caribbean. Professor Prakash Prasad, President, University of Trinidad and Tobago. Distinguished Professor Rory McGreal, Athabasca University, Canada. Professor Sharon Hack, Chair, Open Lectures Committee. And this is her first open lecture, so this is your inaugural open lecture. Deans, heads, faculty, staff, and students of the UWI St. Augustine campus, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this evening's distinguished open lecture on the contemporary theme, the power of open, how open educational resources can transform education for the 21st century. I am proud to say that the Distinguished Open Lecture Series has a track record of featuring excellent quality lectures and presentation. Through this lecture series, this campus has engaged dynamic international, regional, and local leaders in academia and pioneers in industry. The featured speakers have offered perspectives on topics of immense interest and value to this campus and the wider society. This evening is no different, as we'll hear from Professor McGreal, who, as a UNESCO International Council for Open and Distance Education Chair in Open Educational Resources, will explore the topic of open educational resources. The global shift of education towards more hybrid teaching has been one of the catalysts for an upsurge in the reliance of easily accessible digital resources. As a result, the use of open educational resources has become an increasingly popular topic in higher education. OERs have the potential to not only improve student learning, but also to widen accessibility to education through the affordability of teaching and learning resources. The nature of open educational resources, therefore, aligns well with the UWI's 2022 to 2027 strategic goal of access as we seek to increase student enrollment in all campuses. As higher education leaders, we are even more cognizant that regionally and globally, the rising costs associated with education is a barrier to many students. One of the essential costs of higher education is learning materials. Altering how we view free quality educational resources versus costly traditional textbooks may potentially be one of the ways that we attract more students, potential students who would otherwise be deterred by this expense. I'm especially interested to hear Professor McGreal's presentation this evening, as we expect to see a gradual increase in the use of open educational resources at this campus in the near future. This is expected as the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, under the directorship of Dr. Rory Hill, has successfully received funding and support from the Commonwealth of Learning to advance the framework of open education resources at this campus. Professor McGreal, thank you for agreeing to deliver this evening's lecture. We welcome this opportunity for education and awareness surrounding open education resources. We look forward to hearing your expert insights and recommendations. I do hope that this lecture will help to increase the levels of buy-in for the use of open educational resources by our faculty and students. Ladies and gentlemen, let me close by thanking the chair and the faculty representatives of the Open Lectures Committee 2023-2024 for organizing what promises to be yet another intellectually stimulating lecture. Colleagues, students, members of the public, I hope that you enjoy this evening's lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ramnarine, for those very insightful remarks. I would now like to invite Dr. Leroy Hill, the Director of Center of Excellence in Teaching and Learning, or as we commonly call it, CETL, to introduce our featured speaker, Professor Rory McGreal. Let us welcome him to the stage.
Thank you, Professor Hack. Dr. Peter Smith, Chief Education Officer, Ministry of Education, Trinidad and Tobago. Professor Inda Ramnarine, Acting Campus Principal, and other members of the Campus Executive Management Team, the UE St. Augustine Campus. Dr. Len Archer, Provost, University of the Southern Caribbean. Professor Prakash Prasad, President, University Trinidad and Tobago. Distinguished Professor Rory McGreal, Chair of the UNESCO OER initiative at UNESCO and at Athabasca University. Professor Shireen Hack, Chair of Open Lectures Committee, the UE St. Augustine Campus, heads, deans, faculty, staff, students at the UE St. Augustine Campus, special invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. This distinguished open lecture follows two workshops on open education resources here at the UE St. Augustine, sponsored by the Commonwealth of Learning. And for this, we are truly honored and thankful. You know, within the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, we advocate for a wider view of teaching excellence. This view advances the thinking that there can be no teaching excellence without addressing issues of access and equity, two tenets of open education resources. You know, this wider view of teaching excellence invites us as educators to be driven by a passion for open education, Today, we have the opportunity to embrace the power of open education resources, because open education resources are not just tools. They are expressions of our institutional values, our mission, which calls us to create knowledge, foster innovation, and advance learning, not just in the Caribbean, but in the wider world. Open education resources empowers us to access, create, and share knowledge in ways that enable positive transformations. They enable us to overcome the barriers of cost, time, and space, and to reach learners from diverse backgrounds and contexts. By adopting open education resources, we affirm that education is not a privilege, but a right for every student everywhere. Today, we have the right and best person who is going to give us a deeper insight through the person of Professor Rory McGreal. Professor Rory McGreal is a professor in the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies at Athabasca University, Alberta, Canada. He is also the UNESCO International Council for Open and Distance Chair in Open Educational Resources and director of the Technology Enhanced Knowledge Research Institute. Additionally, Professor McGreal is the editor-in-chief of Canada's first open access journal, the International Review of Research in Open and Distributed Learning. As part of his work as a chair of OER, he has been responsible for creating the OER Knowledge Cloud, a database of scholarly articles and reports related to OER. From 2001 to 2011, he was the Associate Vice President for Research at Athabasca University. Previously, also, he was the Executive Director of Tele-Education, which is in New Brunswick, a Providence-wide bilingual French and English distributed distant learning network program. Prior to that, he was responsible for the expansion of the Contact North Center, which is a distance education network in Northern Ontario, which involved high schools and other institutions of that region. Professor McGreal's PhD in 1999 in computer technology and education was achieved from Nova Scotia University School of Computing and Information Science and was taken over the internet. Pioneer. Rory was the founder of the world's first e-learning website and one of the world's first meta-learning objects repository, the Telecampus. In the past, he has worked in Canada as a teacher's representative, and abroad in Seychelles and Middle East and Europe and various other capacities which we can attest to him being here in Trinidad and Tobago. Certainly, Professor McGreal is a long-standing contributor, and his work has been recognized through many awards. Some example includes the Innovative Educational Technologies Award, the European Distance Education Network Senior Fellow, the Canadians Network for Leadership in Education Award, the Lifetime Achievement Award, Open Education Consortium, Open Courseware Consortium Award, amongst some of those awards that he received. Ladies and gentlemen, I can speak forever, but please join me in welcoming our featured speaker, our distinguished speaker, Professor Rory McGreal, to the stage.
Hello. Thank you very much for the kind words. I believe the protocols are concluded, so I can start. Excuse me. I'm going to be talking about the power of open and the future of education. And I can say up front that you'll find that I'm very biased in favor of open education and of access to education by students. All of these slides are open. They're openly licensed. However, some of the images on the slides are used under fair dealing for education and research purposes. I think I've got 2 speakers. I'll just stay away from you. Is this better? Yes? Okay. Yes, and so you can use the slides, and you can actually also use the images for education or research purposes under fair dealing. I'm speaking today in support of the 2012 Paris OER Declaration. I'm going to turn this off if I can. I think that's interfering with it. No, I'll just move to the other side. Yes, the Paris Declaration says basically that open education resources will not be the panacea for education for all in support of Strategic Development Goal 4, which is education for all. It won't be the panacea, but there will be no education for all unless we use open education resources, that they will be part of the package where we can achieve this goal. We've all heard in the last few years about the the COVID virus, and we keep hearing how that has affected education. And I'm going to suggest to you that the virus had very little effect on education. Really, it was the lockdown. It was the response to education, to the virus that caused the problems in education. And of course, staggering impact on global education. As you can see from this chart, the number of learners impacted by school closures just grew incredibly. And in many countries, students lost up to a year of schooling. So from this lockdown, there's been a pivot to increased digitalization and more opportunities for reskilling the workforce and the need for new skills and competencies and enabling industries to be productive, innovative, and competitive. And this pivot has been towards distance education, online learning. And for us as educators, and I believe strongly in this as a supporter of UNESCO goals, John Daniel, the former CEO of the Commonwealth of Learning, told us in 2015 that by 2025 there'll be about 100 million students capable of higher education who will not be able to access it. That we would need to build 2 universities a week of 30,000 students each in order to meet this goal. Basically, he was telling us that it's impossible to do that unless we find new ways of delivering education to larger and larger numbers of students. And we can do this with open education. And this is the main, I believe, the main challenge for educators in the 21st century is how do we educate all these learners? And we cannot have 1 million and more students who are capable of learning not having the opportunity. The former Governor General of Canada told us that education is a weapon of mass construction. And of course, we know she meant by that to build a society, you need educated people. And distance education has come to the fore in order to meet this challenge. And people think that it's a fairly new thing, but we can go back 2,000 years. And we know that the patron saint of distance education was St. Paul. And he sent his epistles all over the world, and people were educated at a distance 2,000 years ago. So there's nothing new about it. And at the Library of Alexandria, Gero started teaching people in the library, and this is where we get the idea of a classroom. That is, students would assemble in one room with the teacher, and they'd read the scrolls and learn about what was in the scrolls. And the reason they did that was that there was no other way. There was no other way of learning. There was only one scroll. And with only one scroll, you have to have students come to the scroll, and it can only be in a room. So people who think that the classroom is an advance in pedagogy, no, it's the classroom is because there was no other way of doing it. We couldn't do education in any other way. And if we go to the Middle Ages, the medieval university, they did have the printing press, but people think that suddenly books exploded. They didn't. They'd print out one book per university on each subject. There'd only be the one book. And the lecturer would stand in the front and read from the book, and the students would come to the classroom, and as you can see there, even in those days, they were sleeping in the back. So there's nothing new about that. But again, people say, oh yes, the classroom, you need the classroom to teach. The only way they could teach was with the classroom. There was only one book. But a guy named Aldus Manutius, an Italian, he invented the idea of you could print books, not huge volumes, but little ones that you could put into your saddlebag or in your pocket. And he started to spread the idea of these little books so as, hey, you can carry your book with you, and you no longer have to go to the classroom to learn. You can learn in other ways. And we have to recognize that now we have many, many more ways of learning than in the classroom. So people who think that classroom is the first and the be-all and the end-all of learning have to start, how do we say it in Eastern Canada? Wake up and smell the coffee. The world has changed. And the idea, the proponents that you have to work only in a classroom with traditional education, the emperor has no clothes. We have to recognize it, that there's no evidence for that. And by the way, we can say that fully. There is no evidence that classroom education is better than online education, distance education, factory education, or any other kind of education. There is no evidence that it is better. There's no evidence it's worse either, so we can take that point. So, distance education after the lockdown, I believe Cinderella has become a princess, that now everyone is looking at distance education, and it's looking at it in the form of online learning. And let's get real. Let's understand what's really happening. The world economy is online. The world economy is global. The world is mobile. Therefore, our students should be online, global, and mobile. We have to wake up and see the world we're living in for what it really is. And we should no longer be confining our students to one simple classroom. We can have webinars and MOOCs, and MOOCs are massive open online courses that students can take, and they can take them from anywhere, and they can be increase access to education dramatically. So let's look at what we can do with the new technologies. And we need to look at copyright, because copyright is holding back much of the innovation in education. Many people, and I believe quite a few people here even today, believe that copyright was implemented to protect the rights of the author. I'm here to tell you that that is not true, that it was never implemented for that reason. In fact, it was implemented for the opposite reason. It was to limit the rights of the owners of the product. And it was, if you look at the title of the first Copyright Act, it was instituted to encourage learning and promote the progress of science and the useful arts. It was instituted for us, for educators, for people to be educated. That's why it was brought in. It was not brought in to protect the rights of the author, not in the British common law tradition, which we share with you and shared by Commonwealth countries around the world. It was not brought in to protect authors' rights. Professor Jazzy says that this view of the rights of the author is para-copyright or pseudo-copyright. That's what big publishers are trying to pretend it is. What copyright doesn't mean is droit d'auteur, the author's right. This is a European concept, and it's in the Napoleonic Code, and most countries in Europe have this concept. We don't. Those who are from the common law tradition do not hold this idea of the author's rights. Let's look back to the very beginnings, maybe 20,000 years. The concept of copyright was utterly foreign to the ancient mind. The idea that there was something wrong with copying was just such an alien idea, people couldn't even comprehend it. Copyists were among the most respected people in society. They had pre-Christianity, you had copyists. You had the monks during Christianity. These were very well-respected people. Copying was accepted, and it was normal. It was a normal part of life. The first copyright law anywhere was in Ireland, and it was brought in by the king against Columkill, or St. Columba, in the 6th century. And what he did was, St. Columba was an educator, and he copied the psalm book belonging to St. Finian. And the King of Ireland, King Dermot, he ruled, to every cow its calf, to every book its copy. This is the earliest copyright law that we know of, and restricting his ability as an educator to copy books, to copy scrolls in those times more than books. And in fact, there was such opposition to it by Columkill that 3,000 people were killed in a battle at Colladrine in 561. And after that, Columkill lost, and he was exiled to Scotland, but he built a monastery full of copyists. And his copyists spread around Europe, many different universities or budding universities. They spread all over Europe during the Dark Ages, and they ended the Dark Ages. They brought it to an end. How did they do that? By copying. They copied the works that needed to be distributed. The modern copyright law comes from the Statute of Queen Anne, 1710. Look at the title. An act for the encouragement of learning. An act for the encouragement of learning, which gives a copyright to the author of the work. It doesn't give the droit d'auteur for any other reason. It gives that copyright in order to encourage learning. And they did it, they said it's for a limited time, 17 years. And since then it's been morphed, and they keep changing it and trying to turn it into something that it was never intended to be, and it's become now 70 years. In Canada, as of January the 1st, it changed from 50 years copyright to 70 years. And what seems to be happening is that every time Mickey Mouse comes up for copyright, they extend it. And that seems to be the trend. And one legislator in the United States, he was asked, well, how long do you want copyright to go on for? And his answer, forever, less a day. And they just want to keep knowledge away from people forever. And the point is, for us as educators, is all knowledge is based on previous knowledge. There is no new knowledge, fully new knowledge. All of it is based on what has come before. In the United States, copyright, again, it also is based on Queen Anne's law, the American version, and they put it into their Constitution, and with the Copyright Act, look at what it says. An act to promote the progress of science and the useful arts. It's not an act to protect the rights of authors. It protects the rights of authors for a limited time in order to promote knowledge, to promote science, to promote the useful arts. And they call copyright now intellectual property, when in fact it is neither property nor is a lot of it particularly intellectual. Anyone who's heard a Britney Spears song might want to agree with me. The correct term for modern copyright is it's a privileged monopoly. What they're doing is they're giving publishers control over a work, a monopoly on their work, as a privilege. And they're getting away with it. Lawrence Lessig, the American lawyer who was one of the main founders of the Creative Commons open license, he told us this, that monopoly controls have been the exception in free societies. They have been the rules in closed societies. But they use the term intellectual property because most of us, we like property. We like to own things. We don't like monopolies. So they don't call it what it really is, a privileged monopoly. They'd rather use the term intellectual property. Anyone who has read George Orwell's 1984 can see how words can determine attitudes. So, open education resources is the answer, I believe, for educators to these privileged monopolists. They want to control all the information. They want to charge huge sums to access the information. They want to tell you how, when, and where you can use the information. Our answer as educators is open educational resources. What are they? They're learning and teaching materials, any format or medium. They could be under public domain or an open license like Creative Commons. And you can reuse, repurpose, adapt, and redistribute. You can do whatever you want with them. You're not prisoners to the rules put out by the commercial publishers. And the Creative Commons has 4 different restrictions. The ones on the left are open. They maintain the openness, and the ones on the right put a little bit of restriction onto the content. So if you put in content, and by the way, the reason we need a Creative Commons license is that in 1963, the World Intellectual Property Organization was formed, and they said everything is copyrighted. Everything, by default, is copyrighted. Before that, you had to put copyright on your work in order for it to be copyrighted. And so, in order for you to share your work, you need to give it an open license. And these are the open license. The first one is Creative Commons Attribution. That means you can use it any way you want for whatever you want to do with it, but you must attribute the owner, the author, or the owner of the copyright. And as educators, we have to do that, because if you don't do that, it's called plagiarism. So we have to use the by, CC by. And the other one below that is share alike. That is, if you give it out, if you give out your work as an open educational resource, if somebody adds to it or changes it or adapts it in some way, they must keep the same license. They cannot change the license. And the other 2 on the right are for special reasons, and I can see sometimes why people would want to use them. But we do not recommend them. They are not fully open licenses. The one on the top, no derivatives, that means you cannot change it. And in education, with lessons and open education resources, we want to be able to change it, adapt it however we want. But this says no derivatives, so we do not recommend you use it. It could be useful, for example, if it's a research article and you don't want anyone to change it. You want it to stay as is. And so there are legitimate reasons why you would want to add it. And the non-commercial is if you think somebody else is going to make a huge amount of money, you put on the non-commercial so as they have to come to you and share the money with you. And in most cases, I would venture to say over 90%, maybe even 99%, it's wishful thinking on the part of the creator. So there are different open licenses, and they go from the most free, which is public domain, which anything over 70 years past the death of the author, it's in public domain. All the 19th century novels, for example, and previous, and early 20th century novels, they're all in the public domain. And all the rest are least restrictive to most restrictive, and you can see the listing there. So what's the way forward? Well, and actually the United States under Obama took the lead in this, and he gave a few $1 million out to organizations that all publicly funded content should be openly licensed. In fact, it's in the American Constitution. And they found ways to bypass it, but this should be in every country, that if the public pay for it, it should be free. It should be available, freely accessible to everybody. So what can OER be? They can be not just books or text. They can be games. They can be curriculum. They can be webcasts. They can be podcasts. They can be a wide range of different resources that are used. The key is to be OER, they are openly licensed and they have some kind of learning content in them to be used by learning. Here's an interesting proposition. A twitch. How many here have heard of twitch as a unit of measurement? No? Yes? You know what it is? Well, I'll tell them anyway. May as well let them know. It's a unit of measurement. It's equal to 2 jiffies, or 200 milliseconds. It's used in electronic game design. Guess what? In 200 milliseconds, electrons on a wire can travel 24,000 kilometers. And there is nowhere on Earth further away than 24,000 kilometers. What does that tell us? That God, in his or her infinite wisdom, designed the world perfectly for playing video games. And I say that because games are really important for education. Games have been shown to be one of the most effective means of transferring skills, transferring knowledge. And so I encourage you to look into how we can use games more and more. So, using OER, what can we do? We can mix them and create a new resource. We can adapt them to multiple contexts. We can extract parts of it. If we didn't like this part, take it out. We can localize it to suit your local context, your country, or your institution, or even your language, translation to another language. Reuse, repurpose. You can do whatever you want with them. You're free. They're not just free of cost. They're free to do whatever we as educators want to do with them. Open means freedom and accessibility. Open is right up there. There's different degrees of freedom. Closed and restricted, that's if you get commercial content, there's not a lot you can do with them. And so with open content, where huge accessibility is increased immensely, and you have all kinds of degrees of freedom. So they're open, you can augment them, you can edit them, you can customize them, you can aggregate, you can reformat mashups, and you can assemble courses. Don't think all the time that now we need to be creating courses. We can assemble courses. We can take OER from different places and put it together and have a new course. We have to think in terms a bit differently about how we work on our courses. We can assemble them using open educational resources. You know, like an IKEA set, you have all different pieces and you just put it together and you have a full course. So, OER increase access to high quality content, to additional learning resources, supplementary materials. Savings and efficiency are great. The marginal cost and effort in making copies and distributing online is almost zero. Speed and immediacy, because it's available and accessible, you can move very quickly in creating your course or implementing your course. Sharing, you can share it without worries about different publishers coming to sue you. You can republish the material however you like, wherever you want. You can use multiple channels, put it on Twitter, X, you can put it on Facebook, you can put it on your local server, you can put it on your university server, you can even print it out. You can have multiple versions of the same concept. And with the wisdom of crowds, we can improve quality. That is, teachers, instructors are going to be attracted to the best content. And by seeing the content where most teachers are going to, it can give you an idea of where the better content is. It can be used for informal and formal learning. We can bridge the gap between informal and formal learning by increasing access. Personal interest and independent learning can be used to approach traditional learning and get credit for it. Learner-generated content can be used. There are new ways of co-constructing ideas, and knowledge can be created, targeted, and shared. And we do know that in creating knowledge and creating lessons, that you learn at a much more effective rate than if you're just listening and not participating. So students constructing OER, well, as Grania Canole tells us, reading someone's rich narrative, interpreting it and understanding it, and making assumptions about it is hard. Whereas if they have constructed the OER, it immediately has meaning as you're constructing rather than just listening and following. You can partner with people because it's freely available. You can partner. You can have mass participation. Anyone can deal with it. And don't forget, I mean, if you're talking about using commercial content in more than one country under different copyright regimes, you have a problem. It's a big problem. OER, no problem. Anywhere in the world you can use it. So you can self-produce, self-publishing is possible. Individualization, you can take it and take the material and individualize it to your particular needs. Online collaborations are really important, and again, I say for OER, online collaborations, OER are essential. The restrictions on commercial content make it very difficult to collaborate. The archives can provide a web-based, viewable, reusable record of quality educational materials. So we can archive them however we want. We can have multiple people archiving. So as if it's lost in one area, you can find it in another. International collaborations, OER, are essential. They can be used for blended learning. The possibilities are for collaboration, knowledge sharing, cost savings, quality improvements, support for independent learning, and communication and community engagement. So all of these things are possible with open educational resources. Or you can take another approach to OER implementation. There's the idea of you create something. There's the idea of assembly, which I mentioned earlier. Or you can just take the full course, the off the peg. So you can, here the dressmaking analogy is good. You can see there, create from scratch, modular, assemble it based on parts you buy, or you just buy it off the peg. And you can do that with courses. You can get a full course package. Take the whole course. And we had a case of one of our professors. He wanted to create a course in computer ethics. And this was 15 years ago. There were no computer ethics courses around. And he said, well, it's going to take me about a year. And I said, well, why don't you look online and see if there's an OER? And he went online, and first of all, he said, how do you do that? And I said, Google computer ethics course. And he was embarrassed because he was a computer science teacher. He knew that. So he did, and we looked at it, and halfway down the first page, you had to scroll a little bit. Computer ethics course, Australian National University. And he said, oh, that looks interesting. And he went away, and he came back about a week later. I met him, and he said, it has everything I want. It's even in Moodle, the learning management system that we were using. It has everything I need. He said, all I have to do is create some Canadian examples rather than just using Australian examples. And he made contact with that professor, and they worked for years together building the course and making it better for both of them. And a number of others came into it. So that's the idea. He took the whole bundle. He just took the course. Saved him a year. And he was able to publish a good paper because he had lots of time to do it because his course was all ready for next semester. So OER also, we know that it promotes student success. The average grade, you can see here that a big shift in both, this is American statistics, they use American terms, white and non-white, and in both cases, a big increase using OER. And the dropout rate, again, goes down, which we want to retain our students. When we use OER, the rate goes down for both white and non-white students. We get a lot of papers in our journal on learner-centered ideas. And I'm suggesting that we should start looking more at learning-centered, because I'm getting now at least 1 or 2 articles a week where they say, oh, these students took the course and they collaborated. They were satisfied. Everything was effective, et cetera, with no data on whether they learned anything or not. Well, what's the point? I mean, it's wonderful. If your students are really happy, that's wonderful. Put it into a psychology journal. Don't put it in a learning journal. If your students are really happy and you can show that the happiness led to good learning, then it should be in a learning journal. But they don't put in data about whether or not they actually learned something. And you have this, oh, they collaborated, fantastic collaboration, this, and they all love to collaborate. And yes, and did they learn anything? And you've got to have the learning center. And the reason we don't, I believe, is because of this fetish with learner-centered ideas. So let's think differently. Did the students learn anything? You've got there, and the list there, the productive struggle, goals and accountability, models, reflection, personal agency, inquiry, collaboration. They're all great if you can prove they're related to increased learning or more cost-effective learning. They're great. Now, for implementing open education resources, there's a major opportunity. And the opportunity, the most cited one for us in Canada and the United States, is the cost savings for students. In fact, our student unions in our province and in other provinces are big pushers of open education resources. They've even taken some of their student money and financed the creation of open education resources. It brings about the cost reduction in the courses as well. As I mentioned to you, if you take the whole bundle or you assemble a course, it reduces the cost of the university in creating the course. Teacher effectiveness comes better with open education resources. You can individualize, and it can increase collaboration among different teachers. The benefits to faculty are there: sharing, quality content, especially because of sharing, flexibility, time reduction, new pedagogies become possible, and adaptation to new ideas. There's no duplication. The content can be updated as you see fit. The technology can be used effectively, gives you more time for research, and there's recognition. If you create a course and it's being used outside of your university, you get international recognition. So the benefits for students, without question, it's the dollar savings. The cost of textbooks average around $250 in Canada. And now we have what we call Z degree in the United States. In Canada, we call them Z cred, because we still use Z instead of Z. And what that means is we have courses now that there's no cost for textbooks, no cost for course materials. And these are advertised in some of our institutions. They advertise that this course has no cost, and it increases the number of students going to those courses. They're good for quality content. Innovative teaching is made more possible. Tech formats are open, and they're easy to access, the open education resources. For the administration, huge cost savings. Huge cost savings. Not just for students. In our university, the books, the texts are all included in the fee. And so it's been a boon for us, but in most it isn't. But the cost savings come to other universities, particularly through retention, that the student retention increases significantly. Challenges, well, I'm sure you have that here. We have it in Canada. Low bandwidth and connectivity. Some students from home have great problems with it. Too much content. There's so much out there, you don't know what to do with which. Citing is difficult, and many want to print it out, and that can be problematic. Challenges for the administration, you have to increase the infrastructure and make faculty aware of OER. When faculty become aware of OER, they generally support it. The challenges to faculty, well, some say there's work overload. Yes, there's work overload if you think your job is to create OER all the time. But if you think your job is to take OER from other places and use it, that reduces your workload. There are legal issues. People panic over the legal issues. I personally think needlessly. Even the big publishers, as big as they are, they're not going to attack or sue an individual teacher or professor, or even the university. There's only been a very few cases on very specific issues where they would do that. And if you're using OER, there's no problem. The adaptation of OER is a challenge for some, and of course, searching for OER could be problematic. So, innovation in openness, there's innovation in new technologies, and in the integration of courses, and there is a need for an OER repository. And if you go to the Commonwealth of Learning, you can see this knowledge series, and it'll give you a good background in what open education resources are. Now, another reason why OER, two major problems with commercial content that OER overcome: digital rights management and digital licenses. I call it digital restrictions management, not digital rights management, because they're restricting us in what we do. We refer to DRM, or digital rights management, as defective by design. That is, they actually put a defect into your operating system to prevent you from using it the way you would like to use it. And that's what digital rights management does. And that's what is when you put in and use commercial content, digital content, is they put in these locks, these digital locks. Digital DRM software needs deep permissions into the operating system. DRM can stop normal operating system functions. Now, many of the commercial content that's online, you need an access code in order to get into the material that they have. And again, with the access code, you give them all kinds of information, etc. And again, it's a way of controlling you and how you use the course material. With digital rights management, they stop you technologically, you can't copy and paste. You can't use text-to-speech, which is a problem for many disabled users. Format change, you can't change the format. You can't move the material around. You can't move geographically. I had a commercial book on my Kindle. I don't use a Kindle anymore. This was a few years ago. But I flew to France, and when I got to France, it said, you cannot use it in this country. I could only read my novel that I'd bought if I'm in Canada or the United States. If you go to any other country, they say you can't use it, and they stop you technically from using it. And for educators, this is a bad one. You cannot use it after the expiry date. You know, you think of it, you have Physics 101 and you're going to take 102 next semester, and you can't use it after the expiry date. You can't print it out, and you certainly can't resell it like you could a regular print textbook. So that's what digital rights management does. But I put this to you. The intellectual property is not property. It's a monopoly, a privileged monopoly. It is not property. However, your device is your property. You own your device. Our device is our property, and the DRM restricts our freedom whenever we're using commercial content, commercial applications in education. With the DRM, it restricts our freedom. And I ask you this question: can we not own and control our own property? They put handcuffs on our technology, and we're innocent. We've never done anything wrong, but they handcuff our technology. Cory Doctorow put it this way: there's no theory of capitalism that says that my private property should be regulated by the state because there's a copyrighted work inside of it. But because you're using their copyrighted work, they control the use of your device. How many have seen this? This uploader has not made this video available in your country. We've all seen that. And of course, the commercial publishers would like to do even more. They want to do it to perfect copy protection so as it breaks your device. And we laugh, but they actually did bring this up in the US Congress. They brought in legislation to do this, that they could put in software that could disable your device and destroy it. For some reason, Congress at this point had made some sense and didn't go very far. However, how many have heard of Error 53? How many have an iPhone? Error 53 comes on your iPhone, or it did come on your iPhone, if it's opened up and somebody repairs it. And what happened was a reporter in Kosovo, his iPhone was broken, and there were no Apple shops in Kosovo, and he got this techie guy, and the techie guy went in and fixed it for him, and it worked. But when he went back to England, and the first upgrade of the software, you know, you get regular upgrades, it destroyed his iPhone. It turned it into a brick. And he tried to make a big scene about it, but they couldn't. Anyway, luckily there were so many complaints, it happened to quite a few other people, they finally, Apple decided it wasn't a good idea to keep this up. So that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to control everything we do with our devices. And Microsoft had the ebook apocalypse, and that showed the dark side of DRM. The ebook apocalypse was when, for whatever reason that they never fully explained, they went in and took huge numbers of ebooks away from people who'd bought them without explanation, just went into your people's computers and took it out. Now, I've been talking about DRM and the technology, but what's worse than the technology are the licenses, the license that you agree on. How many here have read a license when they agree? You know, you press the button, I agree. How many here? No, I'm the only nerd in the room who reads the licenses. I've read a few of these licenses, and they're pretty onerous. They're pretty onerous. What you're agreeing to is basically you lose your rights. And what you've agreed to is that all of the restrictions of the technology, copying, text-to-speech, format change, printing out, moving geographically, etc., all of these things you cannot do legally. And you also have agreed that they have no liability, even if the product doesn't work. You've also agreed that they can invade your computer without further permission at any time, anywhere. And they can collect and use your personal data. And that you have a privilege to use the product. You don't own it. You don't own the software that runs your device. And you're prohibited to show your content to others. This is in the publishers, the digital content of publishers. You're prohibited, if you show your content to your spouse, you're breaking the law. It's illegal. And you must accept that you have no rights. We all have rights as purchasers of property, but we've accepted that we don't have any rights. What they're saying is, we're going to own all of your stuff, whether you like it or not. Deal with it. And here's an example of a license. Microchips authorized representatives will have the right to reasonably inspect, announced or unannounced, and in its sole and absolute discretion, your premises. That is, you've agreed that they have the right to come into your house at their discretion and to audit the records, etc., of the software, whether it's located on the licensee's premises or elsewhere at any time. So that's what's in the licenses. And I saw this cartoon on there. What are you in for? This guy's in for car theft and the other guy for plagiarism? No. This guy's in because he showed, I showed my wife a page from my ebook. He'd be pretty low on the prison hierarchy, wouldn't he? So, we need open textbooks. If we open it, we use open education resources, we can copy and paste, text-to-speak, hyperlink, print it out, move it, and we retain our privacy and digital rights. So we don't need commercial content. I believe that OER are essential for e-learning implementations. And also the license said that you can't use the software to create missiles, biological, chemical, or nuclear weapons. So don't do that. I suggest don't do it anyway, whether the license says it or not. Here's a question. Do you own what we pay for? Access rights. Vendors can control how, when, where, and with what specific brands of technological assistance audiences are able to access content. So do you own it? You paid for it, and you have a new world. We live in a new world. You buy, but you don't get. Do you remember the world we used to live in? If you bought something, you owned it. Do you remember that world? You buy a hammer, it's your hammer. You can do what you want with it. You can hammer in a nail. You can even hit somebody over, well, no, you're not, that's not legally allowed. But you can do whatever you want with your hammer. Now you don't. You don't own what you pay for. They own it. We're in the post-ownership society, according to Audrey Waters. We all just share and rent on the powerful platforms of Silicon Valley billionaires. This is far from a satisfactory alternative. And the World Economic Forum informs us that you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Cory Doctorow thinks of it in another way. He says that it's a return to feudalism. But no aristocrats now, it's the big companies. They own everything, we own nothing. And you see it now all the time. They want you, it's rent by the month. You don't own it, you pay $2 a month for this, you pay $4 a month for that, $8 a month for something else. And on and on and on until, and you don't own it. And that's sad. I mean, we're in this case, this is a poem from the feudal age, 1764 around, maybe 1821. They hang the man and flog the woman who steals the goose from off the common, but leaves the greater villain loose who steals the common from off the goose. So again, they're taking away our common heritage and privatizing it for their use and making us all renters. And you'll notice in those days they didn't have sexual equality. They hung the man and they only flogged the woman. It goes even worse than education. It's in all these devices. Your car. You do not own your car. The software on your car belongs to the company. You don't own it. The license says they can do what they want with it. You've got a, look at here, a heart pump. You have it in your heart inside your body. You don't own the software on that. They own it. It's quite scary. The cars, all these different devices. The tractor I have up there, because in Canada, there was a farmer, he bought a tractor, and they took the software off it. It became useless. He couldn't use it without the software. And he said, well, we have to install the software. We have to come out there. We'll come out in about 3 weeks. Well, if any of you have worked on a farm, you know that a farmer can't wait 3 weeks. If he needs that tractor, he needs it now when the weather's good and everything. You can't wait. He was in a panic. Luckily, his 12-year-old son knew how to get around the web, and he found a pirate version of the software, and he put it on his tractor. But that's illegal. He's not legally allowed to do that. That's why when he reported on it and it was on CBC News, he was anonymous. He wouldn't let anyone know which province he was in or anything. But I mean, that's what he had to do. It's just crazy. And I have one of my colleagues. He won't buy a new tractor because of the software. He goes to old auctions and he buys the old tractors. He doesn't want to get involved in it. And he's a computer expert too. So he knows. So somehow the notion of actually owning the things you buy has become revolutionary. If you bought it, you should own it. It's as simple as that. We don't live in that world anymore. You remember? I remember it very well. You bought it, you always had it, it was yours. So, in conclusion, remember that everything you know is wrong. Every day, computers are making people easier to use. Artificial intelligence is here to stay. We've got to deal with it. It can create relevant learning opportunities, study pathways. It can make personal recommendations, matching employment needs, etc. It's being used all the time now in business. ChatGPT, OpenAI, these are some of the names, Gemini, Bard, etc. But in education, there's technology resistance. And we've had it for a long time. When I first went to school, and I guess I'm the oldest person here, close enough, is we learned to write with a nib pen. And you dip it in the ink, and into the ink, and you write. And I'm left-handed. And it's very difficult with an ink pen to not smudge if you're left-handed. And so I would bring in a biro, a regular pen, and the nuns would slap me on the wrist. You have to learn with a nib pen. And now, of course, I bet nobody here knows how to use a nib pen. It's, even though I learned on a nib pen, I've forgotten already. So there's always been resistance to any new technology. And now they'd say, oh, those pens, and they were expensive. They were more expensive than a nib. Now the nib is more expensive than a regular pen. And then in university, first year university, my professor said, buy the best slide projector. This is a slide projector for those probably you've never seen it. Buy the best slide projector that you can afford because you'll be using it all your life. That was the year that electronic calculators came in. And luckily I didn't buy them. And by the way, a good one would have cost you at that time about $250. That's like $2,500 today. So they were very expensive. They were very expensive tools. And once you learned how to use them, they were easy, but it was difficult to learn. And I'll just mention back in the 1830s, we even had that in Ontario, where the teachers all protested against them using slates. You remember the slates? No, you don't. Nobody is old enough to remember slates. But we had these little slates, like little blackboards that you write on. And they were brought in 1830s in Canada, and the teachers complained. They said, these kids, they don't know how to roll bark anymore. because before the slates, they'd roll bark from birch trees and write on the back. And people lost that skill. So it's a continual problem. But remember this, we do not want to be the educational Amish. And the Amish are good people, we have them in Canada, but they want to live in the 19th century. And they do not drive cars, they do not use machinery, they use horses and carts. And that's fine for them. But for education, we can't have the whole world moving into the 21st century and we're staying back in the 19th century. We have to move forward with the rest of the world. Just to mention how AI relates to copyright, because this is an important consideration for us in OER. In most of the common law countries, only humans can own copyright. But some countries say that the programmer can own the copyright. And actually the UK does, but most of the Commonwealth countries say humans can't, but only the programmer can own copyright. So does fair use or fair dealing apply to AI-produced content? That's another question. So even if they say that, well, the programmer has the rights to it, you can still use it, AI, under fair dealing or fair use, produced content. So there's thousands of creative works, and how much data from each work constitutes the triggering copyright and copyright restriction. And some data is open. It's transformative and it's competitive with the original corpus. So somebody could say, well, they're using part of my novel or whatever and do it. So there's some major issues coming up. In the meantime, use AI to help you construct open educational resources because it's up in the air. Take the leeway, take the high road, and start using artificial intelligence to help you create and adapt open educational resources. So I'm going to finish with these words. The Royal Society in the UK is the oldest scientific society in the world. And they say that the restriction of the commons by patents, copyright, and databases is not in the interests of society and unduly hampers scientific endeavor. And the previous Pope Benedict, he said, on the part of rich countries, there is excessive zeal for protecting knowledge through an unduly rigid assertion of the right to intellectual property. Openness is the skeleton key that unlocks every attempt at vendor control and lock-in. That is, let them put all their locks on their content. We just don't use it. We'll go to OER in education. And remember this, that God is on our side. We know that. Science and God are on our side. We are on the side of the angels. So thank you very much for your attention. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Bob, for that lecture. It was wonderful, very inspiring. So while people are thinking of questions, I have my own question, so we'll get people started. As you go around the world and you discuss this very interesting subject, what's the most common, negativity that you get, that people say, no, this isn't for us? What do they say, no, we don't want to do this?
What I find with faculty is once they get it and understand what OER are, they support it, except for that one faculty member in your department or whatever who's making a lot of money through royalties. And I understand that. I understand this faculty member. And what I don't understand is why you would oppose it if you're not making any money from royalties. And there's all kinds who have textbooks, and I have books, and I'm not making any money on them. Made a few $1,000s, that's it. Like, we're not making money on them. And for them to oppose it, I would scratch my head like, what's their problem? But them, I understand. I'll tell you, educational publishing is the most profitable part of the entire publishing industry. Never mind publishing industry. It's more profitable on a percentage basis than Microsoft, Google, Alphabet, any of these big companies. 36% profit Elsevier made, and the others are all in there. A good profit is considered anywhere between 10 and 20%. 36% consistently over many years from educational publishing. This isn't from Harry Potter or any of those. That publishing is reasonable, 10% profit. Educational publishing, they're ripping us off. And again, people say, well, are you against copyright and compensating authors? And I say, no, I'm not. But in education, I think we have a different role for education. If Britney Spears wants to make huge amounts of money from her songs, even though they may not be very intellectual, that's great for her. Let her do that. If I were to write a book, The 50 Shades of McGreal, I'd want to get money for it. I have nothing against it. I think it's wonderful. Make the money. But in education, we've got to get away from that whole scene because it's a rip-off scene. They're ripping us off all the time, and I think at some point we've got to move on it.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob. Anybody else have any questions?
You really got me going.
Yes, we have a question there. We're going to bring a microphone to you, ma'am, so hold on a second.
Hi, good evening. My name is Sharon Stanley. I am a member of the Global Consortium on Climate and Health Education based at Columbia University Public Health School. In terms of the accreditation of courses online, I see that as a challenge in terms of, especially in a society like ours, accreditation is key. So I'm wondering, how is it that, I know it's peer-reviewed material most of the time that is online, but in terms of accreditation and having your course versus a university course being adopted as part of your educational status. So how do you deal with that?
The same way we deal with commercial content is that the faculty chooses it. If the faculty members say this is content that we want to use, they'll accredit it. And that's what we do now with commercial content, isn't it? Is there another way of doing it? And the same with OER. I wouldn't distinguish either one. I mean, if you're creating a course, are you going to use this textbook that costs $250, or are you going to use the OER textbook that costs nothing? And is it any good? And the faculty look at both books and they say, well, the OER book is just as good as that one. We'll use the OER book, it'll save our students money. You know, the state of California has a law where they say that textbook companies must put the price of the textbook. When they give a sample textbook to a faculty member, they must put the price on there, because faculty have been accepting textbooks not knowing how much it will cost their students. And when they find out a professor is looking to get a new textbook and he sees this is where this costs $250, this costs $100, this one may be an OER, he'll look at all that and he'll say, gee, I think I'll take the OER, or he may take the cheaper textbook. Generally, they don't know how much it costs. The publishers don't want to tell them. They just charge it to the students without the professor even knowing that it's a huge cost to students.
I just have one other point. you showed clearly the business model with regard to computers and the software packages and so forth. I myself had the problem of buying a computer recently and realizing that I can't afford to put on Microsoft onto the computer for a whole 2 years or so. I may only be able to afford 6 months to a year time. So that is also a challenge now with OER and education. Can persons afford to buy the software or the subscriptions to run the programs on? So that may be something that has to be looked into on a global scale to see whether or not for those at the poorer end in the third world countries, whether or not they'll be able to even access that open educational resources on what it's running on, what platforms they're running on, because everything now will be subscription-based and rentals. So that may be something that you'll have to look into, whether persons can afford to or even access the platforms to get onto the open education resource platforms.
Well, how do you do it now?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Right now, I have an old computer, which I own the package, the Microsoft package. So I'm using an old computer.
No.
So it just in terms, getting onto the internet is one thing, yes. But let's just say, for example, creating the software, you have to use Microsoft PowerPoints and things of that nature. In some cases, I don't know what platforms you use and what programs you use. But for the average person, you use Microsoft packages to create your content.
Yes.
So if it is that it's now being through subscriptions, whether or not in poorer countries, third world countries, whether or not they'll be able to do this type of thing and adapt it to their local scenario based on the affordability of it. All right, so there are people who will be locked out of doing this type of educational resources because of the cost of now getting online or getting the programs to create the content.
Yes,
so that's,
but open education resources are more flexible. You can use them on any application. You can change them, you can reformat them, you can do whatever you want with them. With commercial content, you can't do that. You need permissions for it. So open education resources are the best things to use on your software. And by the way, you don't own the software, right? This is what I said, and people have to understand that. You do not own the software. You have a license to use it under restrictions that they put on it. So you own the device, but they control your device. And that is a big problem. But open educational resources are way better for addressing the problems that you're suggesting than commercial content. They're not perfect by any means, but they're better than others. Yep. Any others?
Excellent. Thank you for that question. Anybody else? Well, following on from that question there, you know, culturally, I think when people hear the word free, they get a bit suspicious and think, you know, anything free can't be good. So I know you've converted the audience here, but when you get that kickback that, you know, it's free, is it really free? Is it any good? How do you convert your audience then? What do you tell the people?
What I say is if somebody has a book or a digital course or whatever, and they put a C with a circle on it, or they put at the bottom CC, Creative Commons, it's open, that has no effect whatsoever on the quality of the book. That has nothing to do with the quality of the book. The quality of the book has to be determined by the faculty who are using it. And they say, well, how does a faculty member know that this is good quality content? Well, I'll tell you, if he or she doesn't know, what's she doing teaching that course? I mean, if you're teaching a course, you have to know whether this material is good for that course. I mean, it's pretty simple. And you look at it with OER, and no doubt there's OER that are not as good as other OER. There's a lot of really good commercial textbooks out there. There's no question. I wouldn't 100% go for OER. I'd try to move towards OER, and that's what we're doing at our university. We call it deboning. We're looking at courses where they have expensive textbooks, and we're looking at what OER we can find or create ourselves to replace the expensive textbook with an open educational resource. And that's what I'd be doing. But in the meantime, you use the commercial content. You don't be silly about it. You use what you have available. But you should plan to move out of it, to get out of it. And we did with, we had an accounting course. The textbook was $250, first year accounting. We had a former teacher who was retired who was making about $100,000 a year from the textbook. And he's the only one I've known at our university who's ever made money from a textbook. But we have 2,600 students a semester taking first year accounting. So it's a really high demand course. And anyway, after he retired, this young woman, a new teacher, came on, and she said, "Oh, I want to use OER." And he lost his $100,000 a year. She just switched off, and she got an open education resource textbook and brought in and used a lot of stuff that's freely available online. And the student, I was going to say the students loved it. No, our university loved it, because our university, we have the cost of the textbook in the tuition. And so the university has saved over $100,000 from that one course. And we're arguing that a lot of this money should have been passed on to the students, but once the university gets the money, it's very hard to get it back out. Anything else? Yeah.
Right, do we have one more question? Right. We're bringing the microphone to you now.
Good night, everyone. All protocols observed. First, I'd like to thank Professor McGreal for his very passionate, comprehensive, and insightful lecture on OER. From your presentation, it appears that OER finds its place in higher education. My question is, where do you see, or how can OER be implemented into the secondary schooling system, given an examination-oriented culture where learning is stifled and retention of subject matter takes precedence? So we're talking about systemic change. Would you say it's something that is in our control?
Secondary schools?
Yeah. High school.
Yeah. It's a very important question, and it's been very frustrating in Canada, trying to push open education resources in the secondary schools. I have my own views of why that is. I think there's a lot of collusion between the people who buy the textbooks in school boards and the companies that sell the books. And what they do, the people in charge of buying the books, they retire and they go and work for the book company. And then the book company is there selling the books to the guy who he promoted just before he retired. Anyway, I can't prove this. I just have this feeling. I have this feeling because it's not going anywhere. However, I must say it's going very strongly in many of the states in the United States, both Republican and Democrat. There are some major movements where they're using a lot of OER. And there's a site, Kuriki, I don't know if you've heard of it, Kuriki, that has a huge number of open education resources for secondary schools. So I wish you luck, but nothing is happening in Canada. We've tried, we've done it. I've been in the Minister of Education's office talking about it and showing him, we were showing him in hard numbers how much money could be saved. But I don't think he could break the school board monopoly over buying these things. There's too many vested interests there, but at some place it's got to give, because Washington State, Oregon, Actually, Texas is another one. They're using a lot of OER, and they're saving a lot of money, and they can prove they're saving because at the schools, they give the books to the student. The students don't pay for them. So they're saving huge amounts of money by using OER.
Great, excellent. Thank you for those wonderful questions, and I'll hand back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your attention. Greatly appreciated. Love being here. Thank you very much.
Okay, you can just stay on the stage for one moment. Yes, hold on for 1 second. Thank you, Dr. Niall Farnan. He's one of our committee members from the Faculty of Medical Sciences. And at this point, I'd like to invite Professor Indar Ramnarayan to make a presentation to our guests as a little token for this wonderful opportunity that we've had. Professor.
Thank you very much.
All right, folks, so we are coming to the end of this evening's proceedings, but before we end, I would like to invite Mr. Mark Garcia, Research Officer from SATL, to deliver the vote of thanks. Please welcome him to the stage.
All protocols observed. Good evening, everyone. Please don't be afraid of the folder. I was told not to walk with my hands empty. But on behalf of the Open Lecture Committee and its chair, Professor Shireen Hack, we would like to extend heartfelt thanks to all who have made this event possible. And as we conclude this enriching evening, we would give special thanks to our special guest and distinguished feature speaker, Professor Rory McGreal. Your expertise in OER has ignited a movement locally. With the foundation that you have laid, we are confident that we would see results very soon. As the UNESCO International Council for Open and Distance Education and chair in OER, your impact continues to reverberate beyond borders, and we thank you for visiting ours. To the Commonwealth of Learning and the Virtual University for Small States of the Commonwealth, we say a special thank you for their unwavering support in promoting accessible education and for making this very knowledge transfer possible. Professor Indar Ramnarayan, Acting Campus Principal, Professor Derek Chady, Pro Vice Chancellor of the Board of Undergraduate Studies, Dr. Leroy Hill, Director, Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, and of course, our Open Lectures Committee Chair, Professor Shireen Hack. Thank you all so very much for your hard work in putting this event together. A special thanks to the Marketing and Communications Office, spearheaded by Ms. Chanel Glasgow and Ms. Josanne Green. Now, executing an event like this takes a lot of coordination. So our heartfelt appreciation goes out to the offices of the campus principal, the deputy campus principal, the entire Marketing and Communications Office, the facilities management team, and for campus security's help in making this experience safe and memorable. Heartfelt thanks to the staff of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning for their hard work, and to the management of staff of this Teaching and Learning Complex for creating such an savory environment for this intellectual exchange. And lastly, but in no way least, we extend heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed audience, cherished friends, well-wishers, and members of the media for gracing this open lecture with your presence. As we depart, though, may we pledge to carry on the spirit of openness, collaboration, and lifelong learning. Together, we will continue to shape the education of Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean as we move forward in the 21st century. Again, thank you, one and all. We now turn over to our chair to bring a formal end to tonight's proceedings.
You have been an amazing and engaged audience, and you are a people who want to see a better future and an empowered population. For that, I thank you. Your presence here has truly mattered. And with that, I'd like to say, in the words of what Looney Tunes, that's all, folks. Right? So I thank you and bid you good night and farewell, and there are some light snacks for you as you exit. Thank you, everyone.